Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Michelle Denogean, author of GrowUp, Take Your Startup to the Next Level. Michelle, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. So before we go into the book, why don't you give us some of your background about how you got to where you're at now professionally?
I think it will be interesting, especially on our pre-conversation, Mark, and what we were talking about before, because I like to tell people, and I go all the way back because it makes sense to how I got into this world of startups and scaling. My career was not traditional in the sense, like I always tell people I was digitally born in my career, even if I wasn't digitally born as a human, just based on my age. But
Uh,
that's how I feel. And from the very beginning, I wanted to be a creative. Like that was my jam. I was a writer in my teenage years. My daughter's 15 now. It's about when I was writing short stories and doing all sorts of things. Um, but when I moved back to Los Angeles after college, I found myself applying to a job, and this is going to age me greatly, Mark, that said, write the web. And my mother, who found this in the Daily News here in Los Angeles, said, you should apply. It's the internet, it's the next big thing. And I did. I worked for one of the very, very, very first startups. It was a mortgage company, so it wasn't sexy by any means, but it was like a lead form, and that was the website. And so I helped them build that out. I helped them do marketing. I was very early in my career. At that time was when the internet was really becoming a thing. And I never thought I wanted to actually be in business. That was not, I was going to be a creative. I wanted to come up with campaigns. I wanted to write. But I started to go to all of these boot camps that were popping up at the time where, young people in their garages were getting millions of dollars and, trying to start these companies. I was like, what is happening? My father is an accountant. And I said, business is business. Like somebody's gonna have to learn the basics and help these people like figure it out. And so at the time I was consulting, I was like creating websites for the lamp company down the street. Like I was busy, but I dropped all of that and I went to business school to get my MBA. And since then, I have worked for everything from early stage startups to publicly traded companies. I've worked for companies like Realtor.com, eHarmony, Edmunds. I was there for almost a decade. I spent actually about 17 years in the automotive space. And then most recently, I worked at a company called Roadster that was an early stage startup that we grew and sold to the largest tech company in the automotive space. So I've done a lot and I've actually held a lot of C suite positions and I've run many different teams, marketing operations, analytics, product, you name it. But I did work myself up into the chief marketing officer role. And I'm currently actually in an operational role as I am also an author and a startup advisor for a new startup called Mind Trip. And it's an AI powered travel platform where we are helping people get inspired, but using the newer AI technology with generative AI, actually take that through conversation to booking and on trip experiences. So it has been a blur of a journey, but I have primarily worked in the tech industry. The one thing that I've always heard and sort of what led up to writing my book is that I'm more than just a CMO. And when I first heard that, I said to myself, what does that mean? Like, is that a good thing? Like, does that mean I'm not good at being a marketer? But it really meant I have so much knowledge about what it takes, like hands-on knowledge, sitting alongside founders in all of these startup journeys that I've been on, that I actually know what it takes to scale. And more importantly, I understand the psychology of the founders. And so that is really what led to me writing my book, Grow Up, and my advisory business on top of my operating role.
Well, it sounds, I mean, working for Realtor.com, Edmunds, all of these well-known household names in the space uh, gives you a lot of credibility when you're talking to folks about how to go and get to that next level. So let's start on your book. You open with the idea of superpowers. Why is it important for founders to recognize their dominant strength first?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's an important aspect of like the self-reflection that my book opens up with, because you have to first recognize the one thing that made you great at starting your company. And not lose that. It's important to embrace who you are. Who you are is who you are, right? That doesn't actually change as your company scales and grows. You don't want to lose sight of what you bring to the table. But after you acknowledge this amazing capability you have to start companies, you have to understand that each of those superpowers has a blind spot. And that blind spot, in a lot of ways, is what stops you from growing and scaling your company. And so it's the thing you want to avoid at all costs, typically in your brain, but it's so necessary for growth. And so we start with embrace who we are, because that's perfect. It's exactly who you need to be to start your company. And now let's do some self reflection on what you might find hard for yourself to like accomplish or do on your own. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the team that you put around you. It doesn't mean you have to be all things to all people. You just need a great team that balances you out.
Yeah, I always tell entrepreneurs, and I've done 30 startups, try to hire people smarter than you and hire people that um, others want after a year that they've worked with you. That if they're, I used to tell people when I hired them, if somebody isn't trying to steal you in a year, I made a mistake.
Yeah, I would add to that smarter and different than you,
Yeah.
because you want balance, right? If you hire a lot of mini me's that are exactly like you're going to just boost your superpower up and up and up, but you're going to be missing components of what it actually takes to like scale and have a successful company.
So I guess that leads into the next question. What risks do founders face if they lean too heavily on just one superpower?
Yeah. It isn't necessarily that they shouldn't lead in, like as an individual. They should never lose sight of what makes them great. But what you want to do is try to avoid the blind spots that you have, because those are where the risk is. Like the true obstacle for many founders really isn't the things that, we talk about as far as startup failure goes. Like, if you there's this CB Insight study that talks about like staffing, funding, product market fit, like all of these things that are the reason the startups fail. But I actually believe that the reason startups fail is people. They just don't have the right team around them. And founders often fail to recognize that they need a diverse team. So the risk is when you lean into just one superpower and you don't have a diverse team, there are parts of the growth mindset that are missing, right? You need to not only be able to gain conviction about your business, but you also need to have people that help you ramp up and scale and grow and have process and operations. You need people that are connectors that own the reputation for the company. You need people that can sell, that can win customers. So there's certain aspects that you're just not going to be all of those things for your company.
And it's funny when you talk about sales. I had a client and I told her, you're starting a startup that no one ever heard of. Hire someone who's worked in the startup that no one's ever heard of. And she hired this guy from Bloomberg. And I said, everybody knows who Bloomberg is. It sells itself. He doesn't have to do anything except take the order. And she turned this woman down who had built a startup, sold it for $20 million. And she said, yeah, but he worked for Bloomberg. I'm like, I would choose her any day over every day over
Yep.
this. And she ended up losing the investment she made in the startup and quitting. But if she had chosen somebody who sold something no one ever heard of and was successful, the outcome may have been different.
Yeah, that's a lot harder, right? It's always harder to sell something that people don't know about. Easy to hang your hat on a brand that everybody knows.
Even when you're hiring outside firms to work with you, I started a venture called um, not prompt payment. I started a venture that was the first insurance product to insure small business bank accounts against cyber theft. And it wasn't going well because people just didn't know. that they needed this insurance. And so the insurance company who backed me said, here are 5 marketing firms that we'd like you to talk to help you. And I said, glad to talk to all of them. But none of them had experience ever launching an insurance product that nobody had ever heard of before
Hmm.
and selling them a concept. And all those guys came in and they all said, I don't think I do anything different than what you're doing. You just have to be patient about it. So hiring those knowledgeable people who have experienced something different, so important. The 4 superpowers. Can you walk us through the 4 superpowers and how they complement each other in a startup?
Yeah. So the first one that I would talk about is the innovator. And the innovator is creative and curious. This is like your ultimate problem solver. They understand deeply the customers and they find solutions to their problem. That's they get off on that. They want to understand the problems that need to be solved. Not always, by the way, the problem the customer states, but they understand intuitively the problems that are underneath that, and that's what they go to tackle. The builder, on the other hand, is the person that is going to help you ramp up your company. They're going to look at the data, they're going to put process in place. They're going to be the ones that help you raise money because they have all the data to show that it's a good, viable business. Um, and they also know because they can, with all the data, they can predict when your hiring needs are going to be. So they're going to help you hire at the right time. So that's the builder. The connector is the thought leader. The connector is the person that knows everybody in the industry. And even in a new industry, they just have this capability to get in quickly and meet all of the relevant people and inspire people with their perspective. And then finally, the persuader. The persuader is also a bit of a storyteller, but it's also a means to an end for them. They are analytical and action oriented. These are the people that you want on your team because they're going to be the negotiator that wins deals or negotiates contracts. So that's the persuader. And the reason that they complement each other is because they take very different talents, but each of those together are the things that help you make sure your product has product market fit, so gain conviction. They help you, ramp up and scale at the right time. That's the builder. They help you own your reputation, who you're going to be in the space. And then they also make sure that you've got customers at the end of the day paying you. So they're all very complementary, but each one of them has blind spots that could stop you from collaborating with each other. And so that's why the book is really more about a self-reflection than it is about do this, do that. It's about making sure that you have this team and that you're letting them be uh, as great as they can be.
Absolutely. Which superpower do you see as the most underappreciated or misunderstood by founders?
It really depends on the founder's superpower. So that's a little bit of a hard question to answer, but I'll maybe speak from my own experience because a lot of founders that I have worked with are innovators. I work in the technology space, and I think that, a lot of people are really trying to use technology to solve deep problems. And because of this, like I said, every superhero has a blind spot. So the blind spot that the innovator has is around process. And so they tend to undervalue the builder because they're worried. Like they're like, oh, like I don't want to put process. Process is going to slow me down. That's what the innovator thinks. Process is going to slow me down. And if somebody comes in really aggressively and maybe a little too early with like, we're going to put all of this in place, they'll just push back. And I actually have a story that, if it's okay, Mark, I think it resonates with a lot of people around like how does this show up in the world if you are an innovator, because I think innovators really take to those big meaty problems that need to be solved. And if somebody comes in and for some reason, that project that they were really, really interested in starts to slow down, here's what happens. That's how they fight the builder. They'll insert themselves back into the mix because they're like, whoa, this is slowing down. This thing I'm really passionate about. I'm going to like in technology, I'm going to peel off a couple engineers and come over here and do like a skunk works project. But this disempowers the person that was actually trying to put process in place because they were trying to make sure as you scale that your existing customers' feedback and problems and bugs and all those things are being addressed. And so now you have less people working on these customer issues. And while the innovator may not necessarily care in the moment because they just want to get this big project done, it has this like really strong trickle down effect to everything that's happening in that organization. So those are the things that happen. That's how an innovator not only, has this like one underappreciated, misunderstood person in their organization, but they can really sabotage it.
No question about that, and that often happens. Um, you compare competencies to the four cornerstones of a house.
Yes.
How does this analogy help founders understand the concept of scaling?
Well, I think first of all, building a house without four corners is silly, right? Like that thought for people of like, oh my gosh, well, if I don't actually have the foundation of my house, like, of course, like, why would I do that? My house will fall down. And so I use that analogy so that people can kind of connect it to something that they understand. But an organization is very similar to a house. That's really what you're building at the end of the day. It's like a growing, moving organism, right? And these organizations also need these pillars in order to like stand up and not fall down. So without these core competencies, portions of the organization are likely to be underdeveloped or missing altogether. And that's what I was talking about before. Each of them play a very big role in growing your company and taking it to the next level. And so if you don't have somebody that is going to really focus and hone in on making sure you have product market fit, for instance, well, you're probably not going to get very far, right? If that's not your strength. So that's why I compare it to the house because I think it's a great analogy for people to get their minds centered around this concept of okay, why do I need this balance?
What's the first sign that a company is missing one of these competencies?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think oftentimes, unfortunately, it's when growth stalls. Like I think that is a sign where all of a sudden you're taking a step back because it's really easy to be successful in the very beginning with your superpower or a couple of them in play, and get to a certain point. But if you find yourself in a position, then what I recommend to people is just take a step back. When growth stalls, that's sort of a sign. It's not devastating unless, obviously you've gotten to a point where you don't have any funding, but it's not a devastating moment. And I think a lot of people get kind of heart palpitations when their business isn't like doing exactly what they wanted it to do. But I think, do some soul searching, really think about your blind spots and the people you have around you. The other signal, though, that does sometimes come earlier than that is if somebody you have that you think is great on the team leaves the company because this obviously would be upsetting. Like, why is somebody leaving when we're on this journey together? But that could be an indicator that there is a blind spot and you might have been stopping somebody from being successful and they just got frustrated, right? So those are a couple signs to look at, but you need to be paying really close attention to what's happening in your business, because it's not something unless you really are introspected and really understand yourself that's going to be top of mind when you first start out.
You highlight the Jane's innovator story. What can founders learn from her approach to validating product market fit? So you have to explain about that.
Yeah. So innovators like Jane, she's a fictitious character, but based on a lot of innovators that I have known in my career. She's a natural problem solver. She jumps in with both feet and finds that problem. And I think the thing to learn from her and her approach is she isn't just acting on intuition alone. She's actually looking and trying to answer some critical questions. So they're getting this information, people like Jane are getting this information from talking to other people. And so I think the big thing to learn from her approach is that you need to get perspective from your customers and from the industry. And that really is what's going to validate that there is a potential need here. Um, but it's really about identifying that. And honestly, I think the other thing that innovators do very, very well is they're quick on their feet. So they're quick to evolve or pivot. If they're not getting energy back from talking to potential customers and talking to the industry, they'll evolve. It might be a small evolution, it might be a completely big pivot, but they'll go to where the puck is moving, where they see the biggest opportunity, the biggest problem that they can solve that could be monetized, right? So I think that's the thing to think about is make sure that you're always talking to customers and having these conversations. Don't stay inside your own head with your idea and be insular in your company.
How can innovators avoid falling in love with their ideas before testing them? And how many times does that happen? I mean, right?
It
That's
happens a lot.
more common than anything.
Yeah, it happens a lot. And I think that the reason it happens is because a lot of innovators, the whole problem that they first identify is a problem they have for themselves. So, whether you are in an industry, let's say like you're in the travel industry, which is the industry I'm in now, and you're having this, as a traveler, you're having this problem yourself, you're going to gravitate to like, I want to solve this because it was a really big problem for me. And I think the thing that founders need to really, really pay attention to is they are not their customer. And I typically tell people, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, like Dorothy, like tap your heels 3 times, say it multiple times. I am not my customer. I am not my customer. I am not my customer. Because I think when you fall in love at all costs and you don't talk to potential customers ongoingly, it's just you're setting yourself up for success. It's kind of like a syndrome I call the shiny puppy syndrome. I don't know if I made this up or if you've heard this team, but basically the shiny puppy syndrome is when you fall so head over heels in love with your own initiative and everybody that you share this with in your ecosystem is like, oh, that's a great idea. Mark, that's a great idea. I love it. And now, because it's people with puppies in the back in the day, actually I don't know if this exists anywhere anymore, the pet stores where you could like buy the puppy. But
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
yeah.
they still do.
So when you are in front, everybody loves that puppy. But the minute somebody's like, "Oh, do you want to take this puppy home? Do you want to feed it and care for it?" And like that's when things start. Oh, I don't know if I'm ready for the puppy, right? So making sure that you aren't just sitting with a shiny puppy that nobody really thinks is a big enough problem to like pay for. And I think that's the key because people do fall in love with their own ideas and they might get some early signals, but they really need to dig deep and make sure it's a big enough problem that people are willing to pay for.
Just two things on that. One is my mom, just a joke, funny, but when we were kids, my mom used to ask us if we wanted a dog and would we take care of it. And my sisters and I, she said, we had the three stupidest kids in the neighborhood. That we would ask you that question. All you had to do was say yes. And your father and I grew up with dogs, and we would have taken care of the dogs. But you two, three were so stupid, you'd say, no, probably not. We wouldn't want to take care of it. And so you never had a dog. And so as adults, we have dogs. But we still laugh about that all the time. The other part that so rings true is you have to go and actually talk to people who would pay you and ask them directly,
Yeah.
would you pay for this product? Because I created something called Funding Organizer, and it's the first common app for commercial loan officers to use to collect all the information. And I worked with 15 banks, and it took 48 weeks for them to collect. And I said, what if we had an app that collected all of it? You just sent the app, hit the button, and then the applicant filled in everything. And you thought that would be a big hit. And everybody thought that was so smart. But the chief lending officers and the CEOs of the banks didn't really care about speed of collecting info.
Yeah.
And so we have this thing that we built, but nobody's buying it.
Yep. I've
And
been there too. I've worked with startups that exact same thing, and they would say like, "Oh, well, they're interested, but they're not ready." I said that actually is not good. It's
they don't
better
want
when
it.
you have customers tell you no, because when customers tell you no, you then know exactly why they weren't going to buy it. But if they just kind of sit in this space of like, "Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, yeah, I'll think about it." you get zero feedback as to what's happening, but they're clearly saying no silently, right? So you have to really like understand what it's going to take for people to be willing to pay for something. It's not just about the idea that they think is cool and might solve a problem in the short term.
Well, and that's because, people think, I think very logically about everything. And I have friends of mine says the problem is you're too logical and the rest of the world is not logical. So maybe you need to come up with an illogical idea, like the guy who sold pet rocks, right? And he made like $40 million. I mean, can you imagine somebody walking into an angel group and said, I got an idea it's going to make millions of dollars. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go out my house, I'm going to grab some rocks, I'm going to paint them, I'm going to put them in a box and sell them as pets. People will be like, get the hell out. Get out of my office right now. You're insane. You're nuts. But he did.
Yeah.
And it was very successful. In chapter 5, Ramp Up the Superpower of Building, Rich the Builder was meticulous about planning. Why is structure so critical to growth? And I can't uh, push this enough, this concept.
Yeah. I mean, structure is all about tracking success and creating efficiencies as you scale. So in startup land, if you have been fortunate enough to raise money, it's easy to burn cash on just throwing bodies at the problem. It's really easy to just hire up, but that has like awful downward consequences with burning cash and then running out of money. The thing with builders is they really put that structure in place to predict outcomes. Not like a fortune teller can predict outcomes, but they predict outcomes with data. So not only are they going to help you run your business and like set the goals and see where you are towards those goals, but it's also necessary for things like raising money in the future. um, they're really the ones that are going to know what you need to do at the next growth phase because they can see it in the data, in the structures they've put in place. And in my book, I actually talk about a company that is no longer called Munchery. I don't know if anybody remembers them actually, but
Mm-mm.
they were kind of early, before the Uber Eats and DoorDash of the world. It was one of the very first meal delivery services, and they spun up a network of like gourmet chefs, right? And they started opening kitchens and they started delivering food. Their demise wasn't raising money because they had raised like $125 million. Like they had money in the bank, but it was operational efficiency that ended up killing them in the end. They weren't really watching as competitors came into the market. They had new competitors hit that weren't relying on, chefs. They were relying on existing restaurants, and it was way more cost efficient. So if they had actually like paid attention and kind of seen this happening and looked at how inefficient their operations were, if they had somebody looking at that, they might still be here today, right? So without a builder tracking and developing these strategies, looking at the data, making sure you're being as efficient and as effective as possible, you're just going to end up, in a place where you can't compete.
Yeah, and right, that's always the case that people don't necessarily think about that before they get into it. Um, what advice do you give founders who resist processes because they feel this will stifle creativity? You hear this quite often.
Yeah, and this is the innovator's blind spot, right? We were talking about this before. I mean, I think the advice I typically give is, that there needs to be balance. Like a builder can't come in to building and just like dump a bunch of process on top of the person that resists process because they'll push back. It needs to be something, I say process, not red tape. It needs to be something that you tread into a little bit lighter and put in place at the right time. And so, a lot of times I tell people that story about that innovator who like was like, whoa, like this is slowing things down. But there is actually a solved for helping them still be involved in the creativity and the innovation for certain projects without getting in the way of the process that you need in order to do things like recognize customer feedback and make sure that you're, solving issues that are happening in your product now versus the future shiny object thing. And so I think it's just a balance, and it's knowing that you're dealing with somebody like that and how you put these processes and the structure in place.
In chapter 6, Own Your Reputation, the Superpower of Connection, Sam the Connector leveraged reputation to create momentum. How important is reputation compared to product quality and early growth?
So not everybody might agree with me, but I think they're equally as important because you can have the best product in the world, but if no one knows about it, it won't matter. It's kind of that age old saying, like, oh, if you build it, they will come. And we all know that that doesn't work. So, the one thing I tell people about reputation is this: if you don't spend time building your reputation, somebody else will build it for you, and chances are it will be a competitor, and nobody wants that because they're not going to say nice things about you if you let that happen. And so I actually teach a workshop on this, Mark, if anybody's interested, on how startups can use reputation and punch above their weight to battle the big guys and win. It's something I'm very passionate about as a connector myself. But I do think, it helps. Like as a marketer, I'm always saying, like, if you have amazing product, it makes it a lot easier. But you also have to have that reputation in order to get momentum in the industry that you serve.
How can founders repair that reputation that's already been damaged?
Yeah, I when I saw this question ahead, I was like, this is a really good question because it depends on what damaged the reputation. And what I mean by that is there's sort of three areas that I was thinking about with this question. One is like if you have a competitor out there kind of dragging your name through the mud, um, it may not even be true what they're saying. And so that's a bit easier to deal with because this one is just about positioning and recognizing that the person that's bad mouthing you is only making their company look bad, first of all. So don't stoop to their level. Like, don't come at it and be like, oh, I'm going to talk bad about them. Understand what they are saying so you can position yourself better in the marketplace. But if the reputation is coming from your current customers, that is a little harder to repair because you have to lean in and really listen to their feedback. You have to own up to any mistakes that you've made. Accountability is goes a long, long ways. There was a company when I was in the automotive space that actually dealt with this. They most of the customers in their um, sphere really like it was almost like they were the company I had to work with but didn't want to, right? The reputation was really poor because they were out there with a value proposition that kind of flew in the face of what their customers were trying to accomplish. They hired a new CEO and he went on the road and spoke to hundreds of customers, heard them out. They published these conversations and slowly started to repair the reputation. The third one, which I think is actually honestly the hardest to repair, is damage from your employees. Because your employees are actually your biggest brand asset, they're your biggest advocates. So if they're unhappy, it's just a matter of time before that bubbles up and to the surface, to the industry. So toxic culture can take you down from the inside out, is what I'm saying. And repairing that is a lot harder to do because you have to really open up, be honest, be authentic, admit your mistakes to your employees. But even then, sometimes it takes new leadership to overcome that. So that's why I always actively end up getting involved in culture at every company I've been at because if you don't have a great culture, scaling those companies and being successful is almost impossible.
Joe the Persuader could sell almost anything. What makes persuasion such a powerful growth driver?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think on the surface people think persuasion is just storytelling and, being good with people. But persuaders are actually really analytical in nature and they have this fire to like do what it takes to win over the customer. And so they're the, quintessential negotiator. But they're really focused on making sure that the customer like sees the value that they have trust, and they're convincing them basically to, purchase the product, or, negotiate a deal. And so I think, with that comes this just rigor around meeting numbers and getting things done. And that's why it's such a growth driver, because they're fueled by that. They're not having conversations in relationship for relationship's sake. They're very, very analytical and aware that this is how many deals I need to close this month, and that's how I'm going to get it done.
How do you balance persuasive storytelling with delivering actual results?
Yeah, I think persuaders, they tell stories, but they're not just for storytelling's sake. In the end, it's about, getting to that finish line. And like I said, they're very motivated by revenue targets or cost cutting or doing everything in their power to hit them. And so, they are very good at um, not being, overly verbose and just telling stories for story's sake. They're really anchoring that into what is it going to take? What data can I show them? What customer stories, people they might know? That's where their focus is. So when they're doing that storytelling, it's really focused on the convincing aspect of what they're trying to accomplish.
Um, in chapter 8, what are your blind spots? So you describe blind spots as the biggest hidden threat. Why are founders often last to see them?
Because they're not just weaknesses. A blind spot is something you actually don't acknowledge. You actually dismiss it in a lot of ways. So, as an example, um, if my blind spot is risk taking, which is the blind spot of the builder, I'll ask for data and facts from everyone, until I can prove it isn't worth pursuing. And so I will just ask for more and more and more and more and more information and slow it down until either I can prove it, or like the opportunity is gone. So it's hidden, but through a bit of dismissal. We talked a little bit about the innovator and process, and they're just going to be like, it's just going to slow us down. They dismiss it. And so I think that's the thing with blind spots, is they're hidden because you don't think it's important. You're like, I don't need process. This opportunity is a waste of time. You can't even back it up. You don't have any data. Like, these are the types of kind of self-sabotaging that happens with blind spots.
What practical first steps can a founder take to identify a blind spot? You have to be really self-aware to do that.
Yeah. The first thing I usually ask people is sort of to close their eyes and think about the one thing that's on their list that they avoid doing at all costs. Because usually it's in there somewhere. It's like, oh, um, I need to, fill out that spreadsheet, but, I've been saying I'm going to do it for like 5 weeks, right? It's in there. It's like the thing that's like on the list, but you're like, oh, whatever, I'll get to whatever. So that's a signal that it's related to that somehow. It's the thing that you don't prioritize. The other thing is just to talk to people in your sphere. So if you're really, really interested, the funny part about blind spots is most people around you kind of know what your blind spot is. They're just afraid to tell you. And
Oh,
so,
I think that's always the case.
yeah. And so if you're asking for that feedback, if you're honestly and authentically, and they don't feel like you're gonna, jump down their throat if they actually tell you, the people around you know. Your spouse might even know. So,
Well, I think your spouse, of all people, knows that, right?
yes,
They're not blind to that, and they're trying to compensate to protect you
that's correct.
from that. If you have a good spouse, they'll protect you from that blind spot, right?
Yep.
Um, in chapter 9, overcoming the innovator's blind spot process, innovators can struggle with process. How do you help them embrace systems without losing momentum?
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit. I think the first thing is to recognize that they get very excited by the shiny object, the big innovation. They don't really, I mean, they know that minor enhancements and small tweaks, like, they're necessary, but that doesn't like fuel them. And so if you can let the innovator be the innovator and still stay involved in those big, kind of projects, then they will let other things happen um, around them. And so it's really it's more of like a me internal focus of like if I feel passion for something, then I'm going to let other people embrace those systems and put those things in place as long as the thing I care about is something I can still be involved in and see, come to fruition. So it's a tricky one though because they really do. If that thing gets slow, it starts to eat at them a little bit, and so you need to give them something that they can put all of their passion in. That's not going to stall the rest of the organization.
What's one process that even the most visionary founder might adopt early?
I mean, I am such a big believer in talking to customers on a regular basis. And it's not just something you do kind of one and done when you first start your company and you're trying to figure out what your, kind of core product and offering is going to be or your service. It's really an ongoing thing. And so I think that process of just setting time aside to talk to your customers is probably the most critical piece because otherwise you lose touch with who you're serving. And so even when your company gets big, even if your company goes public, I still think that that is one of the key things that these founders and these CEOs need to be doing. Beyond that, I would say, obviously there's the analytical side and understanding the fundamentals of your business and how it's changing over time. I think that process of just having, especially if it's not like your superpower, your strong suit, just having a process in place that makes sure that you stay on top of that. A lot of times the board meetings are forcing function if you're an early stage startup for that. So even having board meetings when it's really early and maybe you just have, like seed funding or angel investors, it can be a forcing function to make sure you're looking at the business.
Builders thrive on predictability. Can they become more comfortable with risk?
Yeah, it is a great question. I mean, I think the first thing they need to do is recognize that they are risk averse. It's that like self-awareness that is key. And I do think there are things that they can do to overcome some of that. I think many people miss opportunities because they wait too long. And so I encourage builders to maybe start small. Take some risks where the worst thing that can happen is not devastating and kind of roll the dice, aware that it's going to be an uncomfortable place. Because I think once they start seeing that some of these risks are worth taking, they get more comfortable with letting other people in the organization lead those risks and they stop over analyzing because that's what happens. It's like analysis paralysis. Like, well, I need to see this. And does their number look like that? And do you have backup? How many people have you talked to? Is this, like it just over and analyze to the point where the risk isn't taken?
What's a real world example where one overcaution held back a promising company?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest example is the most well-known one, Kodak. It's probably the
Yes.
quintessential example of this. And I don't know if everybody knows this, they actually invented the digital camera.
Yeah.
They were the inventors of that in 1975. They were the inventors. But they feared cannibalizing the existing business, the film sales. And so they shelved it. They were like this is cool. Like they recognized it was cool, it was maybe the future, but this is going to hurt our revenue right now. And they shelved it and let everybody else come in and they lost, a hold on that revolution that was taking place. So that's probably the biggest one. It was over caution because they didn't want to cannibalize their existing business.
I that's right. I mean, that's really what it was, right? Because they were making 99% net profit margins
Yep.
after you factor everything in. And you can imagine that business school people from Harvard or Wharton, I taught at Wharton, would basically say, why wouldn't we, because they're thinking short term, like a founder would be thinking long term. and
Yep.
would make that change. Whoever founded Kodak, Mr. Eastman, he would have just said, we need to make this change if we're going to survive. But somebody who's in there now saying, you know what, this would affect my bonus if I make this change. And all the people around them are saying, you know what, that's right. All of us would be, our bonus is affected.
Yeah.
Let's just ride this puppy and this horse until it drops. And then we'll just go ride another horse. So they're
Yeah.
not really invested in the long term.
Yeah, and I think it's a good, like, if I flip that on its head, it is why startups exist. Because most companies, when they get to a certain scale, they have these existing business models that they're so fearful of disrupting that the startup comes in without any of that background, right? Without any skin in the game, existing business model, and they innovate around them. And so if you're, listening to this and you're actually starting a company, it's actually your biggest opportunity is when you see the incumbents and, they're so wrapped in their existing business models. It's like the best innovator opportunity is to do something there.
Yeah, I mean, you see this over and over again. Blockbuster said, "Hey, it's funny. One of my students pointed this out, and I did not know it. That Blockbuster was making $1 billion a year on late fees,
Hmm.
and Netflix is telling them, you'll never have late fee, you'll never have late things turning in." I'm sure the people in the boardroom are going, God, if they only knew we made $1 billion a year on late fees,
Right.
why in the hell would want to change that? And we have franchisees. We would totally destroy the franchisees' business. So they're stuck in a model that they almost can't get out of. And the people who are running Blockbuster are not the founders, so
Right.
they're looking at their bonuses. But the next people are saying, I got to focus on the customer and what's best for the customer.
Yep.
Same with Walmart, right? That's why they dislodged Sears, is because the leaders that came down the road, again, are thinking quarter to quarter, bonus to bonus. They're not thinking 10 years out. They're just
Hmm.
thinking right now. And eventually, Walmart crushed them.
Right.
And Amazon crushed them, right? They had a 100-year head start on
Yep.
Amazon with the world's most known catalog that everybody in the world used it. That shit alone kept Sears going for another 100 years. And somehow those guys blew both of those opportunities. It's just incredible. Um, okay, I thought we had a questionnaire, but we did not have a question. So, connectors love relationships, but can struggle with empowerment. How does this play out in teams?
Yeah, it definitely can destroy teams because they're not willing to let go until it's too late. And, truth be told, this is my story from early in my career because I did have that problem when I was younger and just starting out as a leader. And I would hold on to things thinking I was protecting my team in some ways, but also with like a feeling that I could do it better. Like they're not going to do it right. That's how the connector feels. The problem with that and why it really becomes disempowering to people is because now I kind of handed this thing over halfway through the project and said, okay, I actually need your help. I can't do it all. My plate is, here. Well, they don't have any ownership. They may not have any background on what they need to do, and they're just sort of like dumped on. And so, when that happens, it just obliterates the culture of the team, and they feel disempowered. And so, it's really important for people that have this connector mindset because they are a little bit perfectionist to let go, bring in that person that from the beginning of the project and let them own it and be okay with a little bit of failure. Kind of like we were talking about with the builder starting slow. Like the way to erase this is to really give somebody a project that is not high stakes and let them run with it and be okay with the fact that they failed.
I had missed this question, but now I'm going to ask you two, I have two questions from the audience. How do you see academic centers for entrepreneurship supporting young entrepreneurs and making this transition you talk about, not just to teaching business fundamentals, but helping them develop leadership, mindset, and networks? Oh,
Yeah.
and required to scale effectively.
Yeah, I think a lot of these centers, these entrepreneur programs, these accelerator programs are really there to support not just the business and understanding, what it takes to scale, but the founder itself. Because let's be honest, when people start companies, the investors are investing in you, not just your idea. And so they want you to be successful. So I do think there's an element of it. Do I think that there's more that could be done to support these founders' mindsets and really get them, kind of understand like the self-reflection stuff we're talking about now? I do. I think there could be more, but I think that the heart is there. And if you are to talk to people in these programs, they would talk through problems that you identify and try to help you.
Yeah, when you talk to entrepreneurs and they hear the investor wants to take majority stock or something significant, and they're always worried about being fired. And I've been working with thousands of entrepreneurs, and I said to them, that is the absolute nightmare scenario for the investor. The worst thing can ever happen is that they have to fire you because now they have to search for somebody, they have to get them up to speed. They're literally losing 6 months to a year. And so the last thing they ever want to do is get rid of you.
Right.
So, and they don't understand it. And I said to them, I've never, in all the times I've got investment, I've never been fired by any board. As long as you listen to the board and they feel they're part of the team, not an
Right.
adversarial relationship. I
Right.
said, they're so praying that you succeed,
Yes.
that they want it more than you do.
Yeah, they have a lot riding on it. And like I said, they invested in you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you more than your idea. Like that's how strong that pull is. So they want you to be successful for sure.
What are some of the strategies to ensure empowerment doesn't turn into micromanagement in disguise? And we've seen that many times.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what I was talking about before, which is getting people involved from the very beginning. So, I think a lot of times what people do when they're kind of leaning into this micromanaging is they think they're protecting their team. And so they don't identify up front an owner on their team. They're like, "Ooh, I'll take care of this. I'm protecting your time." But the first thing you can do in a strategy is out the gate for all projects, who is that person that's going to lead it? It's not you, especially as the leader. You won't have time in reality. So identify them and let them lead it from the beginning. You can support them from the back seat for sure, but let them own it.
Yeah, no question about that. Um, Overcoming the persuader's blind spot. Persuaders excel at selling, but may lack consistency. Why is consistency such a challenge for them?
It's a challenge because they have this do what it takes mentality. And so if the consistent thing that has been put in place by the organization isn't working, they'll go around it instead of giving feedback. And so this means they have more of a tendency to maybe like sell something that may or may not exist or promise something without checking first or using their own materials. And I think really, the way to avoid this is to have a really great relationship within the organization so that that feedback can be given. And, if things need to switch, it's a give and take, right, in the organization. So don't go be the cowboy over here. Make sure you bring your feedback internally so that it can be incorporated into whatever the consistency is the organization wants you to have.
How can a founder balance charisma with building reliable, repeatable systems?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the team, right? That's what we've been talking about this whole time. Everybody has their own unique perspective. And so if you are that charismatic, persuader archetype, so to speak, as a founder, then make sure you have a balanced team around you. Make sure you have a co-founder that's a builder and somebody in the organization that can be, more out there as a thought leader. Like just make sure you have that balanced team around you. That's how you're going to build those repeatable systems.
What's the role that AI is now playing in how entrepreneurs plan and manage their enterprises?
Yeah, it's a great question because I live and breathe this AI world these days. I mean, the world is changing so quickly. I would say that people still don't know the answer to that question in full. But, there are whole businesses and products being spun up now, using AI, whether that is like to generate, code and build something, really quickly overnight. And so I think it's changing and creating some efficiencies in the organization, but I don't know if like that story has been fully written as to what the impact will be. What I will say though is what we're talking about today is so fundamental. I don't think that is going to change. What is going to change is inside the organization. It's not like like a builder's gone, like poof, AI has replaced the builder. Like that is not what's going to happen. But it is really the tool set and how efficient and scalable the organization is. That's where AI is playing a role.
We're actually running a hackathon in December with my 740 students. I teach one class called Agile Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at Vin University. And I'm using my 740 students to figure out how to come up with products and services that will create jobs through AI. And I don't mean like just using AI itself, but what are all the things that AI touches that could increase employment opportunities for college graduates? Because every parent and even the students are afraid, like, should I really major in business analytics, or they won't need it because AI could do the work for somebody who's not good at analytics?
I have a daughter at home who wants to go into game design. And we
Yep.
talk about this all the time. She's 15, she's got a couple more years. Who knows what the world is going to look like? But what I do believe in my heart is she has the opportunity to be the first AI forward game designer. And because she's at that age where things are changing so quickly, how to leverage technology in those capacities is going to be a huge need. So I agree. I think it's going to generate jobs and change jobs, as much as it's going to create efficiencies. And so I'm excited to see what the future holds there.
Yeah, I think what I tell my students is that um, what they're hiring you for now is your creativity, that you are able to come up with abstract thoughts, put them together, and come up with a solution that AI cannot do. It's very linear, right?
Well, you
So I
need that
said,
mindset to feed into the AI, right? Like somebody's
yeah,
going
yeah. But
to.
that's essentially what your competitive advantage is over AI right now. And so keep thinking that way, you'll be okay. I have to say, Michelle, it just went too fast. And I wish you lived here in Vietnam so I could bring you to class, because I think my students would really get a lot out of your book and out of your experience as well. So if
Yeah,
you're
well,
ever
let me
coming to
know if you
Vietnam,
ever want me to join virtually. I'm happy to participate, Mark.
yeah, and we can probably do that, but my classes would, well, I think you could handle it. The classes are like at 9 a.m. here, which would be 8 p.m. there, but my class that's at 1:30 here would be like 2:30 in the morning. Oh no, in California, no, it would be okay because you're 3 hour difference. Yeah, you could do it, just be late night. Okay, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us. And I look forward to further discussions and hope you write more books.
Thank you, Mark. Take care. And thank you so much for having me. And I hope everybody got a lot of value out of today.